Hey, it's Lou, and some wild shit is going down with government-sponsored assassinations, double agents, and a growing list of Vladimir Putin critics who've died mysteriously. But let's not be naive. Spies kill and get killed, right? Is this any different? The recent attempted murder of a former Russian spy turned British informant has quickly become one of the most attention-getting espionage affairs in recent memory. I get it. A poison attack sent 21 people to the hospital, it was on British soil, and it's led to a full-blown international incident.
The Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter. This represents an unlawful use of force by the Russian state against the United Kingdom.
Now, assassinations have a long history in the spy trade. There's even a nickname for it. It's called wet work. And more specifically, the Russians, allegedly, have a bit of a habit of killing ex-spies and Putin critics in the UK, a place that has attracted both Russian oligarchs looking to live it up in the West and Putin critics seeking a safe haven. In a fascinating investigative report last year, BuzzFeed identified 14 people killed on UK soil that US intelligence agencies suspected were brought down by Putin's henchmen. Generally not the type of listicle I expect from BuzzFeed, but a very, very good report nonetheless. Anyway, let's start with some of the suspicious suicides. Boris Berezovsky was a Putin crony turned Putin critic. Somewhat related, he was a billionaire that went broke. So, the story goes, he hung himself with his favorite scarf. But an expert noted that his face was purple in forensic photos. Most hanging victims have pale faces. There was also the issue of a fresh wound in the back of his head and a broken rib. The police determined he fell into the tub after that favorite scarf snapped, hence the injuries. Now, that's not even the strangest alleged suicide. There was Dr. Mathew Puncher, a renowned expert on radiation. He supposedly took his own life by stabbing himself multiple times with 2 different knives. Then there's Scott Young, a mover and shaker who had extensive financial ties to exiled Russian oligarchs. He was impaled on a wrought iron fence after jumping from his 4th floor window. However, there were fingernail scratch marks on the windowsill and wounds on his arm. Still not the strangest suicide. That distinction probably goes to Gareth Williams. The dead body of Williams, an English codebreaker who had worked with the NSA, was found naked inside a padlocked sports bag in the tub of his apartment. The heat in the apartment was blasted as to hasten decomposition. The decomposition, in turn, prevented any testing for poisons. The police said Williams was into bondage and liked going to drag clubs, so the whole thing was probably just a sex game gone wrong. For what it's worth, an escape specialist subsequently tried to padlock himself in a sports bag 300 times and couldn't do it. Then there's Stephen Curtis. He was a lawyer with ties to a number of Russian businessmen who had turned on Putin. In 2004, he told a relative, "If anything happens to me in the next few weeks, it will not be an accident." Within a few weeks, he died in a helicopter crash. How about Alexander P., whose last name I have no hope of pronouncing?
Alexander Pedopilichny.
He was working with authorities to expose a Russian money laundering scheme when he dropped dead on a jog. Could have been a heart attack, I guess. That's what the police said. But a rare Chinese poison nicknamed heartbreak grass was also found in his system, and he did spend the days before his death with the mysterious Ukrainian woman in Paris who was definitely not his wife. Then there's the infamous murder of Putin critic Alexander Litvinenko. British authorities determined the former FSB officer was killed by a dose of radioactive poison called polonium that was dropped into his tea. Rare and super expensive. The dose was estimated to cost tens of millions of dollars. By the way, the execution of that hit was fairly sloppy and even comical, something Luke Harding outlines in his excellent book on that murder. Now, these are just some of the mysterious deaths that have raised eyebrows. There's also been dozens of murdered journalists, protesters, political rivals, and whistleblowers. Actually, as I was writing this, news of another suspicious death of a Putin enemy emerged. Nikolai Mooshka, a Russian exile, was found dead in his London home. Could have been of natural causes, I suppose. He was 68, but his links to the guy accused of killing Litvinenko, well, the whole situation is pretty shady. And it's not just in the UK. Some of this activity has happened in the US. Mikail Essen, the founder of Russia Today, died in DC in 2015. Russian news said it was a heart attack. It was later determined that he died of blunt force trauma. US investigators said he simply fell down drunk. As an aside, Russia's been accused of both violence and head games. When Harding was living in Moscow writing articles critical of Putin, his apartment was routinely broken into and small things were messed with. A window was opened. An alarm would be set for 4 a.m., waking him up in the middle of the night. A VHS copy of an anti-Putin documentary was deleted. Stephen Hall, retired CIA chief of Russia operations, told me stuff like this happens all the time to foreign diplomats, journalists, and spies living in Russia. Someone might break into your apartment and take a shit in the toilet. Your remote control might be stolen, the refrigerator unplugged. Russians even doctored a tape to make it look like an American diplomat was with a prostitute. Then they sent that tape to that guy's wife on their wedding anniversary. You know, normal spy stuff. Obviously, Russia has denied all of this, and outside of Litvinenko murder, very few officials, British or otherwise, have been willing to go on the record to call out the Russian government, even for what appears to be pretty brazen murders. But the tide is definitely turning after the very public nature of the Skripal attack, essentially a terrorist attack on the UK. Still, why do the British, in particular, allow all this to go on unpunished, pretty much, for so long? James Nixie, a Russian expert at Chatham House, that's a think tank in the UK, told me that Russians have a lot of money tied up in the British economy, especially in politically powerful service industries like law and finance. The British were reluctant to jeopardize all that money. They were also reluctant to play a deadly spy game with Russia, a country that seems to play by their own rules. Nixie told me you don't want to get into a pissing match with a skunk. Stephen Hall, that former CIA agent I mentioned before, told me something similar. He said the attempted murder of Skripal, who was traded by the Russians to the UK in 2010 as part of a spy swap that involved the US, is particularly alarming because there's an unspoken gentleman's agreement that you don't mess with resettled spies. They're off limits. Vladimir Putin's government didn't act gentlemanly? What a surprise. Okay, I'm gonna go live my life. Oh, also, you may have noticed I got a new mug. How to do with the Russian pronunciations?
Terrible.
Sweet.
Here's your tea.
I definitely did not ask for tea. I'm kind of worried about that, actually.